set down his champagne glass and looked at me the way men like him always look at women like me, like we're furniture that had the nerve to speak. What he didn't know, what none of the 240 people in that banquet hall in Kelowna knew, was that I had been waiting for this exact moment for 22 years. The envelope in my purse had been there since morning. My hands were steady. My voice, when I finally stood up, was steadier still. But I should start at the beginning, because the beginning matters. My husband died on a Tuesday in February, the kind of cold that cracks your lips before you've made it to the car. He was a pipe fitter at a natural gas operation northeast of Fort St. John, and he'd been with the same company for 11 years. He knew that site the way he knew our kitchen, every valve, every junction, every place where something could go wrong if someone got lazy or cheap. He'd flagged a pressure irregularity in the secondary line 3 weeks before the accident, wrote it up, handed it to his foreman. Nothing happened. The day he died, my daughter was 4 years old. She was sitting at our kitchen table in her snowflake pajamas eating toast when I got the call. I remember looking at her and thinking, I cannot fall apart right now. I cannot fall apart right now. I kept repeating it like it was the only prayer I knew. His name was Arthur. He had calloused hands and a quiet laugh, and he used to leave notes in my coat pockets in the winter. Little slips of paper with drawings of birds on them, because I told him once that I wished we lived somewhere warm enough for birds year-round. I found the last one 2 weeks after his funeral, tucked into the lining of my good wool coat, a small drawing of a sparrow. That's all. I kept it. The company offered a settlement. My brother-in-law, who fancied himself knowledgeable about these things, told me to take it. He said fighting would cost more than I'd ever win, that I had a child to think about, that these companies have lawyers on retainer who eat cases like mine for breakfast. I was 29 years old, exhausted and grieving in a way that I didn't have words for yet. So I signed. But before I signed, I made a copy of everything. Arthur's written report about the pressure irregularity, the foreman's name on the acknowledgement slip, the internal memo I'd found in Arthur's jacket pocket the night he died, the one he must have grabbed at the end of his shift and forgotten to leave at the office, the one that showed management had known about the problem and had scheduled the repair for the following month to avoid shutting down production over the holiday quarter. I put everything in a manila envelope. I wrote the company owner's name on the outside, Owen Hart, and I put it in the cedar box at the top of my bedroom closet, behind Arthur's good watch and a stack of birthday cards I'd never thrown away. 22 years. I want you to understand what those years looked like. I want you to understand because it matters to how this story ends. I worked as a medical office receptionist in Prince George for 8 of those years. I drove 40 minutes each way on roads that went white and invisible in January. My daughter, Piper. I named her that because Arthur used to say he wanted a kid with a musical name, something with rhythm to it. Piper came to the office with me on the day school was cancelled for weather, which in northern BC is not an uncommon occurrence. She'd sit in the waiting room with a colouring book and be so quiet that the patients would comment on it. Your daughter is so well behaved, they'd say, as if a 4-year-old learning to be invisible was something to compliment. We moved to Kelowna when she was 12, after my mother passed, and left me the house on the East Hill. A small rancher with a crabber tree in the backyard and a view of the lake if you stood on the porch railing, which I did more than I should have. Kelowna was gentler, the winters were shorter. I got a job at a dental clinic, then eventually took a bookkeeping course at the college and moved into administrative work at a property management company. It wasn't glamorous, it was steady. Steady was what we needed. Piper grew up fast in the way that kids of single parents sometimes do. She knew how to cook by the time she was 10. She knew how to read a hydro bill, how to negotiate with a landlord, how to stretch a grocery haul. I never meant to put that on her. I thought I was teaching her competence. Looking back, I wonder sometimes if I was teaching her to be small, to expect difficulty, to assume that things wouldn't be easy. I hope not. I genuinely hope not. She was 26 when she told me about him. She'd been seeing someone for about 4 months, and she was nervous in a way I hadn't seen since her high school piano recitals. We were sitting at my kitchen table, and she was turning her mug around and around in her hands. "His name is Elliot," she said, Elliot Hart. I remember the exact way the afternoon light was coming through the window. I remember the sound of the crabapple tree moving in the wind outside. "What's his father's name?" I asked. My voice was very calm. I was proud of that. She told me. I nodded. I asked her if she wanted more tea. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I understood, in those 2 nights of ceiling staring, that I was standing at a crossroads that I hadn't chosen and couldn't avoid. My daughter was in love. The love looked real. I could see it in the way she said his name, in the softness that had come into her face. Elliot himself, from everything she told me, seemed like a decent young man. He worked in environmental consulting. He'd taken her to his family's place in the Okanagan, and she'd come back glowing. His father owned a lodge and resort operation now, had diversified out of oil and gas years ago, apparently, successful, respected, a name that showed up in the business pages of the local paper attached to charitable donations and golf tournaments. I went to the cedar box. I read everything again. And I decided, God help me, to say nothing, not yet. My reasoning, and I've turned it over in my mind 1,000 times since, was that I didn't want to be the reason Piper lost something that made her happy. I thought, let me meet this man first. Let me see who he is now. Let me see what his son is like. People change. 22 years is a long time. Maybe I was holding on to a document that described a younger, harder version of someone who'd since become something different. I was wrong to wait. I know that now. I was wrong, and Piper paid part of the price for my silence, and I have made my peace with that. But it took time. I met Owen Hart for the first time at a dinner at his home in West Kelowna, a large house on the lake, the kind with a dock and a boat and a garage that holds 4 vehicles. His wife, Elliot's mother, was gracious in the way of women who've hosted many dinners. Efficient warmth, good wine, compliments that landed without feeling calculated. I liked her, actually. I still do, if I'm honest. Owen shook my hand and looked at me the way I mentioned at the beginning. Not rudely, not yet, just dismissively. His eyes moved past me quickly, the way eyes move past things that don't register as important. I was a bookkeeper from East Kelowna, a widow. My dress was from a department store and my shoes were not new. I smiled. I had tea. I drove home and sat in my car in the driveway for 15 minutes before going inside. The engagement happened 6 months later. Piper called me at 7 in the morning, already crying in the way of good crying. Elliot had proposed at their favorite spot on the KVR trail with her grandmother's ring reset into a new setting. He'd called me first to ask, and I'd said yes without hesitation, because whatever else was true, that boy loved my daughter with the kind of attention she deserved. The wedding was set for the following September at a vineyard in Naramata. Piper wanted something that felt like the valley, the light, the water, the long, warm evenings. She planned almost everything herself. I helped where she let me. Owen Hart paid for most of it. He made sure everyone knew. I noticed early in the planning that my role was being quietly minimized. I'd suggest something and it would be heard politely and then set aside. The seating plan was handled by Owen's wife and Piper together. I was shown the result rather than consulted. My table at the reception was with the friends of the family group, not the immediate family table. When the ceremony processional was arranged, the 2 families' parents were positioned symmetrically, except that Owen and his wife walked as a unit, and I walked alone, slightly ahead, which in the photographs would look like I had preceded them, rather than being placed equal to them. I said nothing about any of this to Piper. It was her wedding. She was happy. 3 weeks before the wedding, Owen pulled me aside at a family dinner. There had been a few of these by now, always at his house, always slightly expensive, always slightly uncomfortable, and made what I can only describe as a suggestion wrapped in a compliment. He said that he wanted the day to go smoothly. He said that he hoped there wouldn't be any awkwardness about table arrangements or the family photos. He said he thought it would be lovely if I could understand that this was also a significant day for his family, and that he wanted his grandchildren to have beautiful photos of both families standing together. He said it in the voice of a man who considers himself reasonable. He said it while looking slightly past my shoulder. He was telling me to stay in my lane. That was the message. Don't make it about you. Don't make a fuss. Be grateful you're here." I smiled. I said I wanted the day to be perfect for Piper. I went home and I got the envelope out of the cedar box, and I sat with it for a long time. And I made a decision. The morning of the wedding, I put the envelope in my purse. Piper was radiant. I want to say that clearly and without qualification before I describe what happened at the reception, because the wedding itself was genuinely beautiful, and she was genuinely happy. And Elliot's face when he saw her at the end of that aisle was the face of a young man who understood exactly what he had. I cried. I wasn't the only one. The vineyard caught the September light in that particular Okanagan way that makes everything look like it's being filmed, warm and golden, the hills going amber behind the ceremony. The reception moved inside at dusk, into the vineyard's event hall. There were round tables with candles, and a long head table where Piper and Elliot sat with their wedding party, and a microphone on a stand near the front where the speeches would happen. Owen gave his speech first. He spoke for about 12 minutes. He talked about Elliot's childhood, his character, his accomplishments. He talked about the Hart family's history in British Columbia going back 3 generations. He made a joke about the family business that the crowd laughed at. He raised his glass to Piper and said that his son had chosen, well, that she was a bright young woman who had worked hard to build a life from humble circumstances. And when he said that, he looked at me. He held the look for just a second, long enough. The table around me was still laughing at the earlier joke. I don't think most people caught it. A few did. One of Piper's friends, who'd known her since Prince George, looked over at me with her jaw slightly set. Owen sat down. The room applauded. I stood up. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment. I wasn't angry exactly. Anger is hot, and I was cold. The kind of cold that comes from knowing exactly what you're about to do and having made your peace with all of it. I took the microphone from the stand and I took a breath and I looked out at 240 faces. "I'm Loreen Macallister," I said. "I'm Piper's mother. I raised her alone, and it was the greatest privilege of my life." The room was warm and quiet. I looked at Piper. She was watching me with the particular expression of a daughter who knows her mother well enough to be a little nervous. "I want to tell you something about Arthur," I said. "Piper's father, a man many of you never knew. He was a pipe fitter. He worked a site northeast of Fort St. John, and he was good at his job, one of the best," his crew said. He died in February when Piper was 4 years old because a pressure problem he had reported in writing was not repaired in time. The room had gone very still. "He died," I said, "because a decision was made to postpone a repair until after the holiday quarter so that production wouldn't be interrupted. That decision was documented. I have the documentation. I have had it for 22 years. I looked at Owen Hart. His champagne glass was still in his hand. He'd been about to take a drink. He didn't. "I'm not a lawyer," I said. "I don't know everything that will happen from here. But I know a journalist with the Vancouver Sun who has already received copies of everything I'm describing, as of this morning. I know a lawyer in Vancouver who works in occupational safety and wrongful death cases, and who has read these documents and found them interesting. And I know that the man who signed the internal memo authorizing the postponement of that repair is in this room right now." Owen Hart set his glass down. "I'm not telling this story to ruin today," I said. "I'm telling it because a man I loved deserved to have his story told. I'm telling it because my daughter spent her childhood learning to be careful and quiet and to take up very little space, and she deserved better, and she has been gracious enough to become extraordinary anyway. And I'm telling it because some things need to be said out loud in front of witnesses." I raised my own glass. "To Piper and Elliot, to a life with no secrets between you." The silence lasted about 3 seconds. Then Piper's friend from Prince George started clapping. Others followed. Not everyone. The room was confused. Some people were looking at Owen, some were looking at me, some had their phones out. It was not a clean, cinematic moment. Real ones rarely are. I set the microphone down and I went back to my table. Piper came to find me 20 minutes later. She had gone white under her blush, and her eyes were wet in a different way than they'd been during the vows. "You knew," she said. You knew who Elliot's father was. You knew this whole time, and you didn't tell me." "Yes," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. "How long?" "Since you told me his last name." The breath she let out was uneven. "Mom." "I know," I said. "I know. I'm sorry." She didn't speak to me for a long time after that, longer than I expected, longer than I thought I could bear. She and Elliot went to Portugal for their honeymoon and came back, and life resumed in a way that didn't include me. My calls went to voicemail. My texts were answered with short, even replies. Months passed. A Christmas went by where I cooked dinner for one and watched the snow come down in the valley below the house and reminded myself that I had done what I believed was right and that had to be enough. Elliot came to see me alone about 8 months after the wedding. He knocked on my door on a Saturday afternoon and stood on my porch with his hands in his pockets and snow on his jacket shoulders. He said he owed me an apology. He said he had done a great deal of reading over the past months, and that he had spoken to his father, and that the conversation had not gone well, and that he had since retained his own lawyer. He said he was sorry for what had happened to Arthur. He said it plainly, without qualification, looking directly at me. He cried a little. I poured him tea, and we sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours. My daughter called me that evening. We talked for a long time. The conversation was hard and honest, and by the end of it, we were both crying, the way you cry when something that has been held tight for too long is finally allowed to open. "You should have told me," she said. "I know," I said. "I had a right to know." "You did. I was trying to protect you. I was wrong to make that choice for you." She was quiet for a moment. "I understand why you did it," she said. "I don't agree with it, but I understand it." "That's more than fair," I said. She came for dinner the following Sunday. We made soup from scratch, the way Arthur used to on winter Sundays, a long, slow chicken soup with too many vegetables and thick bread from the bakery on the main road. We didn't talk about Owen Hart or lawyers or newspapers. We talked about her work, about a trip she and Elliot were considering, about a book she'd read that she thought I would like. She left at 9 o'clock. At the door, she hugged me longer than usual. "I love you, Mum," she said. "I love you too, sweetheart," I said. "I'm sorry it took so long." I stood on the porch after she left and watched her taillights disappear down the hill toward the lake, and I thought about Arthur, about a sparrow drawn in pencil, about notes in coat pockets, about a man who filed a report and expected someone to act on it and was wrong. I thought about what it means to wait a very long time for the right moment, and whether patience and cowardice are always as different as we tell ourselves they are. I don't have a clean answer to that. I'm 63 years old, and I've stopped expecting clean answers. What I know is this. Owen Hart's name appeared in the business section of the Province about 4 months after the wedding, in a story that described a civil inquiry into workplace safety practices at several northern BC extraction sites going back 2 decades. I don't know where it will end. I'm not the one who decides that. What I know is that my daughter and I had dinner again the following Sunday, and the Sunday after that. What I know is that one morning in March she called me very early, the way you call your mother when there's news that can't wait, and told me that she was going to have a baby, and that if it was a girl they were thinking of a name with some rhythm to it, something musical, something with a little life in it. I sat down on the kitchen floor and cried. Outside, in the crabapple tree, a bird was singing in the cold, clear morning. It had been a mild winter, and they'd come back early that year, ahead of schedule, the way good things sometimes do. I've thought about that cedar box a lot since everything happened. 22 years I kept that envelope. 22 years of Sunday dinners and school pickups and hydro bills and winter drives, and the whole time there was a rectangle of manila paper sitting in the dark behind Arthur's watch, waiting. People ask me, not often, but sometimes, whether I regret waiting so long. I don't have a simple answer for them. What I have is this. I understand now that the waiting itself was a kind of choosing, and every choice carries something forward and leaves something behind. What I carried forward was my daughter. What I left behind was time I can't get back. Time Piper deserved to know the full truth. Time Arthur deserved to have his name said out loud in a room where it mattered. I made that trade thinking I was protecting her. I was also, if I'm being honest with myself, protecting me. It's easier to keep an envelope in a box than to watch your child's life crack open around a truth you've been holding. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. Not Owen Hart, not the wedding, not the speeches, not the look on his face when he understood what was happening. What took the longest was accepting that I had my own accounting to do. Integrity isn't something you have or don't have. It's something you practice, imperfectly over years, and sometimes you look back and realize you practiced it badly in a particular moment, and you have to carry that. Piper practices it better than I do. She always has. She came back to me not because I'd done everything right, but because she has the kind of mind that can hold two true things at once, that I'd wronged her and that I'd loved her, fully, without condition, every day of her life. That's not something I taught her. That's something she figured out on her own, through the particular toughness that comes from growing up knowing life doesn't soften itself for you just because you're young. Arthur had that toughness too. He filed that report knowing it might make him unpopular with the foreman. He did it anyway because he understood that the right thing and the easy thing are not usually the same thing, and that a person's character is mostly built in the gap between them. I didn't fully understand that lesson until I was standing at a microphone in a vineyard in Naramata with 240 people looking at me and an envelope that had waited long enough. What I know, what I'd tell anyone who's sitting with something heavy and unresolved, some truth that feels too large to carry into the open, is that clarity eventually costs less than silence. Not because the truth is painless. It isn't. Piper and I lost almost a year to the aftermath of that day, and I felt every week of it. But the silence had already cost us things I hadn't even noticed paying. A version of honesty between us that we couldn't quite reach. A weight she didn't know she was half carrying. She called me early on a March morning to tell me about the baby. I sat down on the kitchen floor. Outside, a bird was singing in the crabapple tree, earlier than expected, ahead of schedule. Some things come back. Sometimes they come back better than before. I'm 63 years old and I've stopped being surprised by that, but I haven't stopped being grateful for it.